We're going.
Yeah, you're the. Okay.
Good morning. Can y'all hear me okay? Yes?
Yeah.
Everybody was waiting for somebody else to nod. Good morning. I'm Greg Casar. I represent the heart of Texas and the United States Congress, and I'm proud to chair the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I'd like to start today by looking backwards, not at the beginning of this war, but at the beginning of this administration. The day that Donald Trump took office, he created the Department of Government Efficiency to, quote, cut wasteful expenditures. Trump, Musk, and Republicans in Congress told us we were too short on money, so we had to make cuts. And cut they did. They cut funding for cancer research. They cut funding for kids' cancer research. They cut funding for nuclear safety workers and aviation workers. They fired people who care for our veterans and clean up after disasters. They cut funding for 17 million Americans' health care. And now, after cutting and cutting and cutting, the Trump administration wants $200 billion for their war of choice. Today, the Progressive Caucus says, enough. We are announcing an official position against Trump's disastrous $200 billion request of funding for this illegal war. Not one more cent for this reckless, illegal war that is making no one more safe and no one more free. Let's put Trump's $200 billion war request into perspective. For $200 billion, we could send $600 to every man, woman, and child in America. Remember the ACA tax credits that used to help 20 million Americans afford their health insurance? $200 billion could cover those again and again and again and again, 6 times over. It could provide free lunch to every kid in America with $170 billion left over. It could cover child care for 14 million American children. Donald Trump says $200 billion is a small for the war, but that's pretty easy for him to say because he never pays it. It's not his health care getting cut. It's not his kids going hungry. It's not his budget getting stretched thin. And what are we getting for the money? What's the actual price that we're paying? 13 American service members already tragically killed. Thousands of civilians dead. Millions displaced. Gas prices up. Food prices will follow, maybe leading us into recession. Every day it gets worse. Yesterday, we learned that Donald Trump is deploying 3,000 more brave American men and women to the Middle East. That's thousands more parents lying awake at night wondering if it's going to be their kid that goes next. We must end this war now. Democrats must unite against this outrageous request. We should join together to block the request and stop the war as best we can, or at least force Republicans to answer to the American people who overwhelmingly oppose this war. And I'm proud that, as it so often does, the Congressional Progressive Caucus is first in leading the way. I'm now proud to call up our Chair Emerita, my friend Pramila Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Chairman Casar, and I'm so proud to be here with the Progressive Caucus as we take these bold and necessary positions. We are all here today because we are furious about Trump's illegal war in Iran. Yesterday, it was reported that Trump will send 3,000 more soldiers to the Middle East. Today, he announced that he's sending 1,000 paratroopers there, and it certainly appears that he is gearing up to have American boots on the ground for a senseless and dangerous war that Congress never authorized, that the American people do not want, and that will waste hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money and skyrocket costs for Americans right here at home, all the while killing innocent civilians in Iran, in Lebanon, and displacing millions of people across the Middle East. This is not an excursion. It's not a little journey. This is a war that completely undermines America's stability and ability to lead the world towards peace. We have already spent $30 billion on this war. That's enough to end homelessness in America or to provide free school lunches to all American children. And Trump is asking for another $200 billion. And as the chairman said, there are so many things that can go towards, including, by the way, we could cancel all medical debt for 100 million Americans in the United States with that $200 billion. We could provide free school lunches for all kids in America for almost 2 decades. And we could fund nutrition assistance for 42 million Americans. There are real needs right here at home. But Trump is recklessly taking us to war, risking the lives of our troops, choking off the world's energy supply, and killing civilians in poorly planned, targeted attacks. We've seen over and over again from our past history around the world that forever wars and ill-fated regime change efforts do not work, and that bombs are simply not the answer. And the CPC has been at the forefront of that debate over and over and over again. Our work internationally needs to be for diplomacy, and our work here in Congress needs to be to rein in an out-of-control president before more lives are lost. Our founders knew that going to war was a very serious decision, and they knew that it was a decision that had to be debated by the elected representatives of the people here in Congress. They were breaking from the monarchy, from the idea that kings and one person alone would say that a war was good for the people and lie about it, and then plunge the entire country into disaster. That's why we have to refuse this budget request, and we have to vote on another war powers resolution that stops this illegal war immediately. And now it's my honor to hand it over to another colleague of mine on the Foreign Affairs Committee, Representative Sidney Kamlager-Dove from California.
Thank you, Congresswoman Jayapal. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sidney Kamlager-Dove. I'm the Congresswoman for the 37th Congressional District, and as was stated, a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So today we are here to talk about money, specifically $200 billion in taxpayer dollars that Donald Trump is requesting for his illegal war on Iran. The Congressional Progressive Caucus, sorry, y'all, I'm wearing all kind of hats today, but the CPC is a hard no, and I am here to tell you why. Because this supplemental request is straight BS. The war is already costing over $1 billion per day, has taken the lives of American service members, and is pushing us towards the brink of a global recession and deeper isolationism. The average American already has personally paid $152 toward Trump's war of choice. That is a utility bill, that is school supplies, that is a grocery bill. And now Trump is asking Congress, which never authorized this war in the first place, this dumpster fire, to fund it with no end game in sight. So let me tell you something. As a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, there were no full committee hearings on this war before it happened. And subsequently, there have been no full committees on this war, with no plan, with no strategy, with no discussion about imminent or continued threats, nothing. So why not tell the American people how you are spending their money and risking their children's lives? Why not put the evidence on display so people know exactly why we are risking our safety and our money and our children for a war of Donald Trump's choice? Because there are too many questions and we have gotten no answers. But what we do know is, just last week, Tulsi Gabbard reappeared in front of the Intelligence Committee, and she long assessed that Iran would use the Strait of Hormuz as leverage. And now we are seeing gas prices in my home state teetering over $6 a gallon. The same Iranian drones that we have watched Russia use for years against Ukraine are evading U.S. air defenses and killing service members. And Trump previously was warned by the intelligence community that a large-scale military assault on Iran would be unlikely to topple the government. Now they assess that the regime is actually more entrenched and more hardline. So the reality is Trump chose to barrel towards a war with Iran from the moment he ripped up Obama's nuclear deal in 2018. Trump is messy. This president is messy. And now he is messing with Americans' lives, our money, and our safety. You've already heard from members of what this money could be used for. I'm going to give you some more. You could cover nearly 3 million people on Medicaid for a full year. You could feed over 3 million families through SNAP for a full year. You could build 91,000 affordable housing units in a year. U.S. taxpayers should not be forced to foot the bill for Trump's failed foreign policy when there is so much urgent investment needed right here at home. So sorry, not sorry, DJT. You break it, you buy it. And you can take it out of your crypto money and not from the American taxpayers. My progressive colleagues and I are standing firm against funding Trump's avoidable, costly, illegal, ill-conceived war. And now I want to turn it over to my sister from California, Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs.
Thank you. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. So, as the representative of San Diego, the country's biggest military community, I have deep respect for everyone who wears our country's uniform, and I feel a profound sense of responsibility to them. It's been my generation and my community that have risked their lives and sacrificed more than most when presidents conduct regime change operations or military adventurism in the Middle East. Just last week, 3 San Diego warships carrying 2,500 San Diego-based Marines deployed en route to the Middle East. So it's not our president's lives or Congress's lives who are on the line. It's my friends, my peers, my neighbors, my community, my constituents. So let me be very clear about something, because we know that the war hawks are going to try and say the opposite. Voting against this supplemental and this war is actually a vote for our troops, who deserve a Congress that will ask the hard questions and reject rubber-stamping wars that lack a clear strategy, endgame, or basic oversight. The $200 billion defense supplemental package isn't just a few extra zeros on the budget for the Pentagon. This is not a small price to pay, as Donald Trump says, because that price is our service members' lives, civilian lives, and the future and possibilities that we're stealing from my generation and the ones that come after. You've already heard all the things $200 billion could fund. It could fund twice the cost of high-quality universal pre-K for every 3- and 4-year-old in this country. It could build affordable housing units. It could pay over 27 million families on STAP. And let's be honest about what this $200 billion actually buys when it comes to this war. At the rate that this war is burning through money, nearly $2 billion a day, that supplemental funds roughly 100 more days of combat. That's not a one-time cost to wrap things up. That's a down payment on a long war. And the Pentagon hasn't even passed an audit to account for the $1 trillion Congress already gives them every year. I'm glad that CPC is taking this strong position against this defense supplemental, but this shouldn't only be a progressive position. If my colleagues consider themselves pro-military, they should vote no. If my colleagues consider themselves constitutionalists, they should vote no. If my colleagues consider themselves deficit hawks or fiscally responsible, they should vote no. And if my colleagues care about their fellow Americans and our future, they should vote no. So while I hope that these ongoing talks are successful in ending this war, Donald Trump has opened Pandora's box by starting this reckless and illegal war, and it's still unclear whether Iran will become a failed state, devolve into a civil war, get a harder line leader. Congress should not excuse that behavior and send a signal to any president that they can do whatever they want, and Congress will forgive and forget and fund their military adventurism. It's our job to represent and fight for the American people. It's our responsibility to be their voice. And the American people do not want this war, especially when it costs $200 billion and they're struggling to afford groceries, gas, and healthcare as it is. Congress shouldn't worsen our cost of living crisis by approving this $200 billion package. So I hope all of my colleagues will join us in voting no. And I will turn it over to my friend and colleague on the Armed Services Committee, Congressman Chris DeLuzio.
Thank you, Rep. Jacobs. I'm proud to join my caucus colleagues here today As you heard from Rep. Jacobs, a member of the Armed Services Committee, I'm also a veteran. I served in the Middle East. I served on the ground in Iraq, a war that my generation of veterans will pay the cost of for as long as our generation lives. And to see so many of the same mistakes being made again, to squander and frankly put in harm's way Americans who don't need to be in harm's way, it's something that we have to fight back, to push back against, to end. And I see this administration doing it. They skipped Congress because they knew their Republican counterparts would let them. They knew the American people wouldn't want this war, which is why you see the polling day after day showing more opposition to this war. A war that's already cost 13 American lives, hundreds wounded, a region destabilized, an economic price we're all paying here at home, global energy markets in shock. And to think this administration didn't understand that the Strait of Hormuz might be shut down by the Iranians, something that we knew 20 years ago from our military experience in this region. And the cost we've all heard about today of what this administration is asking the Congress for, $200 billion. $200 billion is a lot of money. They've already spent more than $20 billion by most accounts. And that $200 billion could do a lot in our districts and a lot for the American people. We saw this administration take health care away from people. $200 billion could extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits for more than 5 years that they let expire. The Republicans talked about their need to count pennies and dollars. They could have extended it for more than 5 years. $200 billion could pay for a community college, 2-year community college for 23 million Americans. We could have high-speed rail in this country. We could pass the American High-Speed Rail Act, just about $200 billion. That's the cost. We could have free school lunch for basically every kid in America for years. We could have the cost of child care covered for every kid under 5 years old in this country. That's what $200 billion could spend. These are the choices. And this administration, what's their answer? Tax cuts for billionaires, make you sicker and hungrier, and you're going to foot the bill for a war while jacking up our debt along the way. So I think this is a clear and easy case for the Congress to say no. No to continuing to fund for a long time a war that we haven't authorized, that the American people don't want. And I think about, I've got friends who are still in uniform. I think about the Americans who are over there to fight or might be sent to fight, and they will do their duty. They will serve and fight courageously if we send them. But we have a responsibility to never squander that patriotism, to never squander their willingness to serve, to ask hard questions. And those kinds of questions demand an answer, I think, right now of saying no. So I'm honored to introduce a fellow Pennsylvanian, member of the House Appropriations Committee, Madeline Dean.
Good morning. And I'm delighted to stand here with my friends, colleagues on the Progressive Caucus. But I stand here not just as a member of the Progressive Caucus. I stand here as a member of our entire caucus, the Democratic Caucus. I stand here as a citizen who believes that this supplemental request is incoherent, irresponsible, and just plain wrong. Let's remember where we are. The president is tasked with two things. Number one, to keep America safe. Number two, to make life more affordable for everyone. He's failing on both fronts miserably. We are less safe as a result of this adventure, this excursion, as he calls it, in the Middle East. Everything is going up in price. We were already in trouble as a result of his brutal immigration policies and his incoherent tariff policies. Now layer in that what has happened to the price of oil, what has happened to the price of gasoline at the pump, now over $4 in my district, and the price of diesel even higher, making costs for everything we buy more. So he has failed miserably. But I'd also like you to picture what he has done around the globe. And what I see is rubble. Rubble in location after location. You can be looking at the White House itself. You can be looking in the Middle East. Rubble is what this president's legacy will be. And sadly, who's in the rubble? American military members. Children are in the rubble. I have the privilege of serving on both Foreign Affairs and the Appropriations Committee. And when I go around the world, as I've had the luck, the good fortune of doing, and talking to leaders around the world, our allies, our friends, NATO members,
They look at us and they are confused. What is your president doing? And you're really losing what they say to us in meetings, private and not so private. You are losing the respect of your allies and friends, which is extraordinarily dangerous. Madeleine Albright called us the indispensable nation. Yet I have heard from members in Europe, for example, they know they need to be prepared to go it alone without this indispensable nation because of the unreliability of this president. So he took us to a war of choice. He's made us less safe. He never went to Congress. We can take that personally because of responsibility. The framers put it that way. I think what's even worse is he never even went to the American people to make this case. This isn't about process so much as you didn't even ask the American people if this sacrifice, financial and human sacrifice, was going to be worth it. Our founders were smart. They thought this thing through. They knew a monarch, a king, one person, should not have the power to declare war and put American lives at risk. So what I want to do, and so I'm a clear no for this bill that was put before us without even asking for authorization for force. What I want to do here, if you don't mind, and I know Secretary Christy Hegseth, as I like to call him, doesn't like the front page talking about the cost of war. But I'm going to read the names of the service members, 13 now, who are dead, because we must not forget their sacrifice. Captain Cody Cork, Sergeant First Class Nicole Armour, Sergeant First Class Noah Tegens, Sergeant Declan Cody, Major Jeffrey O'Brien, Chief Warrant Officer Robert Marzan, Major John Kilner, Captain Ariana Savino, Tech Sergeant Ashley Pruitt, Captain Seth Koval, Captain Curtis Angst, Tech Sergeant Tyler Simmons, and Staff Sergeant Benjamin Peddington. To the press, I ask you never to forget these names. Call out their names, their sacrifice, their extraordinary service. Call out this administration as it uses crazy Orwellian dangerous language like war is peace, and I'm just on an excursion. This is no excursion. This is war. It's deadly. It's chaotic. It's messy, and it's wrong.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for that very important reminder. And when Donald Trump says that it's a small price to pay, the lives of those service members is not a small price to pay. And thank you to all of my colleagues for your excellent remarks. We're here to take questions from the press. I think the first one is from Kevin at MS Now, if you're here. All right, great. It is critically important for Democrats and all Democrats in the House and Senate to hold the line on ICE reforms. Some of the ideas that I heard floated yesterday involved still providing funding to some of the very same agencies that killed Alex Preddy. So I think the Congressional Progressive Caucus's position is that leadership in the House and the Senate and rank and file Democrats in the House and the Senate need to stick to our position, which is the American people's position, that we're not going to give ICE and CBP billions more dollars until there are dramatic reforms so that we can prevent the killing of more citizens like Alex Preddy and Renee Good. Go ahead, Matt.
On the War Powers Resolution.
And sorry, just so we can get into it, if you could, I know who you are, but if you can mention your name and outlet, it's just part of what we do here.
The War Powers Resolution, a number of your Democratic colleagues voted with Republicans on that a couple weeks ago. What is your message to those Democrats in your caucus who aren't with you on that, and do you hope they will join the rest of the caucus in voting them?
I hope we can have a unanimous Democratic no on the next War Powers Resolution.
Some Republicans have raised using reconciliation to pass supplemental funding. Do you have concerns about that by taking a stand on this?
The big ugly bill could be coming back, and it could be even uglier. And I think this is less of a question for us than it is for vulnerable House Republicans. Does Mike Lawler really want to vote for $200 billion for an illegal war instead of restoring health care for his constituents? Does Republican Congressman Gabe Evans really want to vote for billions of dollars of war when his constituents are losing their food assistance? Does Republican Congressman David Valadao really want to vote to fund a war and ICE without basic reforms like taking off masks from ICE in his district? These vulnerable House Republicans, I'm not sure, are ready to vote to make, to essentially seal the end of their political careers. And others can step in and answer questions if you'd like.
So in the One Big Ugly Bill, they already passed supplemental funding for the Defense Department, about $150 billion in addition to the regularly appropriated funds, making the defense budget $1 trillion this year. As part of that supplemental funding, around $45 billion were for munitions, which is what they say they need this $200 billion for. Almost none of that money has actually been obligated yet. So in addition to just all of the things that this money, this $200 billion could be spent for instead, I think there are still a lot of questions on what they actually intend to use it for when there is already funding for munitions replacement that they have not obligated.
Nick with Semaphore. Question on military funding. I mean, I know this is, you guys were talking about this $200 billion number, but say, the Trump administration comes up with a smaller package that is just to fund troops that are in the field. Is something like that acceptable for the Progressive Caucus?
No, I think you've heard, Nick, that of course we'll look at whatever comes and we'll evaluate it. But what you've heard from Sarah, from others, is they already have lots of money and they haven't made a case for the war. So those two things together, I think, are very, very important. Just because they come with a smaller request doesn't mean that we forget about the fact that this is still a war of choice, that there are American troops that have been killed and more that will be put at risk, that there are civilians in Iran, in Lebanon, across the Middle East that are being killed right now. And so I think that we have to go back to, why are we at war? Why have we taken this step when the American people don't want it, when they are really struggling on the ground with losing their health care because Republicans ripped it away? And so I think that it doesn't, in some ways, it doesn't matter fully what the request is, though it is significant that the amount that they asked for is $200 billion. That is a significant number, but I think the core element of why are we going to war without authorization, without a case being made to the American people for a war that is making us less safe and driving up costs for the American people. That still stands.
I think it's also, the American people want to know what this president is doing with their money. So they're asking for $200 billion. They've not made a case for the money at all. And then subsequently you get articles coming out showing that the Department of Defense's, the secretary is spending exorbitant amounts of money living high on the hog. Money that could be used to fund child care, health care, to help people get housing. So why are we going to give you more money? And lo and behold, you might use it to eat more lobsters while you're putting our service members at risk, and you're not even coming to us with a concrete plan, a strategy for ending and getting out of this war, and allowing us to have serious continued audits on how you're using the money that you've already been allocated. It makes zero sense, and it doesn't matter the number. This is a value proposition that we're talking about and going around the powers of Congress and the voices and concerns of the American people.
We have time for one more. Go ahead.
Evan Carr, NBC. I wonder if you could comment on the Trump administration lifting some oil sanctions on Iran.
Well, I think this goes to the point that this is a completely senseless war with no plan. We have lifted sanctions on Russia. We have now lifted sanctions on Iran. And those things do not comport with the rest of the arguments about how we have to wage this war on Iran. So I think there are many points of complete hypocrisy and senselessness, and that is one of them. And we in the Foreign Affairs Committee have been continuing to, we have some briefings, not about the war, but we have people before us who come to testify who can't answer a single question about strategy, including that one.
Thank you all very much. We really appreciate you covering this press conference and this topic of utmost importance. Y'all have a great day.
And to endanger everybody's lives.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Lindsey Graham put out a statement this morning saying that he has consulted with the President and Leader Thune and that he plans to move expeditiously on reconciliation, that this second package will deal with funding Homeland, supporting the military, and addressing voter integrity. Do you think that's feasible? And have you or Chair Arrington had any conversations with Senator Graham?
I've talked to Senator Graham last night, and not specifically about this, but other matters, but I'm glad to know the Senate is interested in Reconciliation 2.0. As you know, I have been a broken record. We need to do that. It's an important legislative tool. We already had a set of priorities that we're working on in the House, and it is possible that the defense supplemental will be a part of that package, but we don't yet have the details. And I know you all have a lot of questions this morning about what the number is going to be requested, and so do I. We haven't gotten that yet. I think they're tabulating that. I think the Department of War and OMB and the administration are working that out, and I suspect we'll get a specific request. That's how the process works. And when we get that, we will go through our processes here to review that and look at it and check its feasibility and all of that. But it may be, sadly, and I would say this, it would be a sad outcome that we would have to get a military funding bill done with only Republican votes. That's what the reconciliation package will allow. It's quite sad and really shocking and dangerous. Again, Democrats with their crazy policies. They have Trump derangement syndrome. They would not even, I don't even think they would agree to vote on a bill that would simply restock our munitions. We've used some of those, as you know, in Operation Epic Fury. And we've got to do that. It's a necessity. The first job of the federal government is to protect the people. But Democrats, I don't think we can count on their votes to do the simple, basic responsibility of Congress.
Mr. Speaker.
So it is part of reconciliation.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, good morning. On the government shutdown, Mr. Speaker, it seems as though Republicans and Democrats are talking past one another right now. Mm-hmm. Is the only person who could solve this the President of the United States, and why isn't he involved?
Well, I think he is involved. I mean, I know he had
He knocked down the plan yesterday.
Well, that's what's been reported. Okay,
he said that in the Oval Office that he was not pleased with that plan.
Well, I actually have his exact quote somewhere. I think he said that, to paraphrase him, I think he said he's a little skeptical or cynical that the deal's going to come together. What we're hearing, okay, in our chamber is that there's discussions going on, and Democrats are demanding to break off parts of Homeland and fund it separately. I'm so appreciative Congressman Siscomani. As he noted, he was in charge of the Homeland bill as it's in its earliest stages coming through the House, and it was a bipartisan bill. Remember, the Democrats agreed with all that. They understood. It's one of the 12 appropriations bills in their annual appropriations packages, and we always have Homeland funded as an entire department. There's obvious reasons for that. It's very important. I don't think we need to be breaking it apart. And so I think that's what the President is reflecting there. He wants Congress to do its dang job. We have done it, the Republicans have, but the Democrats are refusing to go along on that. even though just several weeks ago, they were in favor of it. Now, they don't think it's politically advantageous for them, and they're playing games, and it's endangering the lives of American citizens, and it's causing real hardship for people. You know that there are 450, approximate number this morning, there are 450 TSA agents who are no longer going to work for the agency. How can you blame them? As Peter Scalise said, 49% of FY26, the fiscal year, they have been unpaid. This is a real hardship for their families. And all the travelers, business travelers, people traveling to go to funerals and weddings and with their families, they can't get through the airports because the Democrats are playing games. And you know what? You should ask your ultimate question, why? Why is Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, why are they doing this? Why would they know this is crazy. They have to know it's crazy to not be able to call this out. Why are they doing it? Because they're afraid of their radical base. Boom, that's it. That's why they gave us the longest shutdown in history last fall, and that's why we're on the second longest shutdown in history right now. They are afraid to go to their base and say that they're doing anything that complies with common sense and their basic responsibility because their base is screaming that they're not fighting Trump enough. It's crazy. I don't know another word to describe it, and they're putting everybody in jeopardy, all the inconvenience and all the hardship for their own political skins. That's it.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. First off, go Lady Tigers on Friday. Second of all, there's talk about the Pentagon is supposedly dispatching 2,000 troops. How is that not putting boots on the ground? And you said we're not at war. How is that not an escalation of war in Iran?
Look, I think it sends a signal to Iran that they better get their act together. We need to resolve this quickly, and that's the president's interest, and that's ours. It's everyone's. We need the Operation Epic Fury is almost done. I mean, I think the mission that was very clearly defined in the beginning, the objectives have been met. We have to get the Strait of Hormuz straightened out, and we need our international partners to help with that because it's a giant project that involves everybody around the world at some level. So I'm optimistic that's going to happen. The buildup of troops is very different than boots on the ground. We don't have boots on the ground. I don't think that's the intention, but I think Iran should watch that buildup, and they need to take note of that. They have to reopen the Strait. They have to be good neighbors to their Middle East neighbors over there in the region. They cannot have a nuclear warhead. They cannot have that capability, and they cannot declare war on the United States and Israel, which is what they did, decades ago. Our mission will be accomplished. I think that will wrap up in a short time period, and I know that's the intention of the administration and the Department of War. We have the greatest, most powerful military fighting force ever conceived in the history of planet Earth. It's an amazing power that we have, and we wield it for good. We've done it here. That job is almost done, and I think it will wrap up.
To follow up on that, Mr. Speaker, you said a few weeks ago that we are not at war with Iran. Is that still your position?
I think we're wrapping up Operation Epic Fury. That's what I think. I think it will be done in short order, and that'll be right on schedule.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. President Trump has railed against mail-in voting as rigged. He said it's a form of cheating as recently as Monday. But he's also called on Congress to do away with certain types of mail-in voting in certain circumstances. But in yesterday's special election in Florida, he voted by mail. How do you square those two statements?
Look, I think some states have handled mail-in ballots well. I think Florida is a good example of that. They don't allow fraud, and they have great systems. I was talking yesterday with Laurel Lee, one of our colleagues here in the House, and she used to help run elections in the state of Florida, and she talked about how many great processes they have in place to ensure that you don't have a lot of fraud. But that is not true in other parts of the country. And that is the concern, especially in a state like California, or states where they just send mail-in ballots to everyone for no reason whatsoever. It is a matter of common sense. It is an obvious thing that if you're mailing ballots out, inherently, it opens the door, at least the possibility of fraud. It's much easier to patrol that election integrity if you're making people come in person, show a photo ID, and prove who they are. Obviously, that's an obvious thing. It should not be a controversial notion. That's what the president's talking about. That's what we have talked about at long length. Some states do it a lot better than others, but it doesn't mean it's not a problem elsewhere in the country, and that's why we continue to advance every election integrity measure that we can, because, again, if you don't have free and fair elections in a constitutional republic, you cannot maintain it. And there's hardly a more important issue than that. That's what the president's hung up on, and us as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
the Lady Tiger features is on me.
Nice.
No.
So we're good for that.
Yes.
Okay.
I left my core. I went to Atlanta and picked up like all my stuff.
It was a great job. Oh, wow.
I like to wear things that I bought at Goodwill that I never fit into.
Yeah.
My lens was like,
Thank you. I don't know.
Oh, that's right. How did it go last night?
and I'm like, wow, it's still shaking. And then I realized,
Oh, good. No, it's White House, you need to move it down.
I'll be fine for a while.
Right. Right. You're lucky that was it. Of all the things that go wrong, that's the better one. See you later.
How are you? What are you doing coming out?
I gotta go to the White House.
Yeah, I'll give you that. What time's the break?
One.
You are what you are, and it is what you is.
The bottom line is every organization can be better. Every organization can be more coordinated, and every organization can be more thorough with communication. But if you do that, you will slow down the process.
Gotcha. At what point do you think that this conflict creates tangible problems for the U.S. economy? I mean, what signals are you looking for to gauge whether or not this is flipping from a temporary oil shock to something that could meaningfully dent growth or meaningfully push up inflation?
Well, it's not just an oil situation. I mean, it's the one thing I would remind people is, look, we talk about oil and the Straits of Hormuz. A lot of other vital goods come through that part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting into the growing season here. Growing season is fertilizers, nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
We're also having other sort of rare earths, aluminum, steel. We're having other issues sort of percolate through the system right now where there is a supply-demand imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you said, and I'll reiterate what you said, the longer this goes on, these things are not linear. They're not linear. If you shut down a shipping system for a couple days, it doesn't really matter. You shut it down for a couple weeks, it matters a lot more because it compounds upon itself,
Mm-hmm.
and the system gets farther and farther out of balance. So the longer we end up in a sort of global shipping chaos,
Mm-hmm.
the longer it takes to recover, just from the shipping standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Then you could add onto that the reality of wells, pipelines, refineries. Turning off a well is relatively quick. Bringing a well back on takes a lot more time to repressurize and bring up full production. So, even if we went into a full use of the Straits of Hormuz right now, and we got as many ships through as we could, there will be some noticeable delays. And A, the logistics of moving all those boats, but B, the reality of getting the facilities back up to 100% of capacity where they were, a month ago.
I'm glad that you brought up some of those other commodities that are affected here, because some of those do have bearing on what IBM does, helium, metals. I mean, how are you guys game planning for this internally? Has it started to affect any of your short or medium-term investment plans?
Right now, it's not having a real effect on us. We're fortunate enough that we plan out fairly far into the future.
Mm-hmm.
In the places where we're buying a lot of chips and we're buying a lot of components to manufacture mainframes and storage, we have supply chains lined up for a fairly long period of time. So, right now, it's not really having an effect on us, and, business continues to move ahead.
You mentioned supply chains. There was a panel on trade not too long ago. I mean, have you had to adjust supply chains at all in the last year, given the variability, I will say?
I think every company in America has been adjusting supply chains for the last year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've all been trying to become less dependent on China, more domestically focused to the extent it's possible to be domestically focused. But even being domestically focused may mean that you're willing to sign a long-term supply contract with somebody that gives them the ability to go out and build the property, plant, and equipment they need to manufacture in the United States. So, we at IBM, as well as other companies, are becoming much more forward-looking about securing supply chains and making sure we understand where they're coming from. Look, this is... I point to this in a bigger picture. I always say if we learn nothing else from COVID, we should have learned how fragile the U.S. supply chain is. And we saw how it can be disrupted relatively quickly, and equally as important, or more important, how dependent we are, or were, and we still are, on the rest of the world to manufacture what I would call essential goods for us. And an essential good to me would be a chip. You know, the fact that we were dependent on the world for importing chips, and not the most sophisticated chips. You know, if you were like a lot of Americans and got bored of what your kitchen looked like during COVID, a lot of people decided to renovate their kitchen. There were no dishwashers, because somehow dishwashers today have to be smart and they run on chips. There were no toasters, because toasters have to be smart and run on chips. And the production facilities all shut down because there was no chips. So, you know, the fact that we made a pretty strategic decision coming out of COVID to insource or resource some of these supply chains in the crucial goods that we need to manufacture, I think is a really important point. It's an important point in time. You know, look at what's going on right now in the Middle East. You know, we're firing a lot of very sophisticated weaponry. I think a Tomahawk missile has over 300 computer chips in it, and you fire it once and you don't get them back.
Yeah.
So think of how many chips you're going through, and if we did not bring that capacity back, at some point we would be constrained by other countries selling us the chips we need to even build our military industrial base.
I'm interested to get your perspective on what that durability component of the supply chain conversation is doing to the political environment, because there's been a lot of conversations as well about affordability in the last year. So to the extent your supply chain is now more durable, was that a cost driver for you guys? And at what point did those costs start to percolate through to your customers and their customers and their customers?
Well, all costs percolate to the end user. So at the end of the day, if your cost of production goes up, most likely company margins are not going down. Margins will tend to stay unchanged. So ultimately, the consumer is paying for it. That said, and this is a big that said, you know, every corporation I know, IBM for sure, we're trying to make ourselves more efficient. So as certain input costs go up, can you defray those input costs going up by becoming more efficient somewhere else in your process? More efficient may mean more and more technology. It may mean more and more robotics. It may mean more and more automation in your facilities. It may be sourcing other products. You know, being able to substitute a high-cost product for a lower-cost product that has the exact same result. And so companies are going through that in sort of almost every major industry line. I think companies are going through the optimization of their manufacturing or their services and how they optimize and how they deliver those.
Gotcha. Want to stick with one more question on Iran here, and that's, you know, the Gulf is now a huge source of capital for markets, for companies, for investment funds. Do you see that being affected at all by this conflict? Do you see the GCC maybe pulling back on some of the commitments that they might have made in the last year to, you know, fund U.S. businesses to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, since it is going to be a pretty costly rebuild?
So, yes, but on the other hand, I think the relationships between the GCC and the United States, and Israel for that, are going to come out of this stronger. So I think the last thing you'll see is a withdrawal of capital from the U.S. market. I think that many of the Gulf Coast countries are going to end up investing more in the United States. They're going to clearly buy more weapon technology and defense technology. We are one of the greatest producers of weaponry in the world, some of the most sophisticated weaponry in the world. And I think most of those countries now will look at the need to protect themselves with a much more serious attitude. I think many will refortify their military base, but I also think there will be a natural move to support a great ally in the United States. So I don't see this as a negative. I see this as actually as a positive long term.
Gotcha. One tailwind that doesn't seem to be at risk at the moment is AI. That's been a huge driver of GDP growth for the last year. And setting aside the war and maybe tariffs, that's clearly the economic story of the moment. In your work at IBM, in your conversations with CEOs, where are you seeing the biggest real-world impact now? Because there is still a component of this that is Well, we expect productivity to get better, but we may not be seeing it.
So look, I think you have to evaluate this to some extent. So look, AI in its derivative form is clearly driving GDP. But what's really driving GDP right now? It's the manufacturing and building of data centers, the manufacturing and building of power, the manufacturing and building of what I would call more of the infrastructure of AI than AI itself. If you look at surveys, and IBM just did a survey of a couple thousand companies, companies at this point are all experimenting with AI. Initially, they tried to use it for efficiency, and there are some efficient frontiers. But overall, companies are still in the very, very early stages of adapting AI and having AI really fall to their bottom line. There are some really prominent use cases, and we're huge supporters of these, whether it's an HR assist program. There's a lot of the functions in human resources that are more efficiently done by a machine, and the people that were doing them are substantially happy not doing them. Like, I hate to tell you, but when you buy a new home or take a new mortgage and you need a reference letter to how long you've worked at a company, what your position is, what your salary is, what your 5-year income is, no one likes having to go to the database, pull that out and send it. The machine can pull that out and send it, and you can get it real time versus having someone go pull it out. That's efficiency.
Is that going to apply to New York City co-ops as well?
It does. It does apply to New York City co-ops.
They needed a bit
so,
more personal
so
information.
when you're using an HR assist for that, it makes an enormous amount of sense. And so we have done that at IBM. We use a lot of HR assist. But so the people that were looking up your history, they're now doing something that we would consider much higher value added. They're out recruiting on campuses. They're out mentoring. They're helping us retain employees. So, it's a win. I would say in the code writing world, probably one of the huge other great advantages that we're seeing code written dramatically faster now by code assist programs. It doesn't mean the companies are getting rid of programmers. They're just using them for different things, and they can manufacture quicker, which means that instead of having a list of 1,000 things to do that you want to do in code, you may be down to 900 because the machine's speeding up. So we're seeing some effects of AI, but we haven't seen the overall enterprise effects of where we possibly can go. And there's a lot of reasons to that. We're still building data centers. And ultimately, a lot of companies still don't have their data in a format or in a place, even though we now can pull data out of unorganized places. It's all about data organization, and getting the data, and we're still evolving on that.
Got it. Are you concerned at all about worker displacement, though? Because there have been a number of layoffs, or a number of companies, I should say, that have announced layoffs that have cited AI as a factor. I think IBM has said that it's let some folks go, or is planning to maybe let some folks go because AI can functionally do some of these things maybe a little bit more efficiently.
Well,
do you see that impacting?
I'm going to maybe slightly disagree with that. I'm not going to say there's been no AI layoffs. I'm not going to make that bold statement. But I will make the statement to say there's another factor here. And the other factor is, I'll go back to COVID because you sort of have to. In the COVID days in 2021, 22, with people working remotely, every company in America was hoarding employees. They were scared to death to not have enough workers, and productivity went down pretty dramatically. People working at home just are not as productive as people working together in the same room, able to collaborate. So companies were making sure they maintained a maximum employment level. As we've seen return to office, and we've seen people come back and work in a collegial fashion and talk to each other and put in longer hours and longer days and travel more and get more productive, I think companies have found that they don't need to hoard employees anymore. And at the same time, they have seen labor costs rise. They've seen commodity prices go up dramatically. They've seen their input costs go up. So as they're trying to balance that equation between input cost and cost to the customer, something has to give. So what's been giving in many respects has been human capital. So if you look at it, I think last quarter there were 120,000 layoffs sort of noted in quarterly releases by major companies. And the number is higher than that. But if you look at most of those people, they were not victims of AI. Some, I'm not saying some weren't, but the vast majority of them, I think, were victims of companies becoming more efficient in a world where their input costs were going up and they felt pressure not to raise pricing.
Gotcha.
So this is going to continue to evolve. I think we're in an evolution. I'll also say one other thing that I think is important, that if you look back at the history of the world, this is not the first major technical advancement we've had. Every time we go through one of these seismic technical changes, there are thousands of stories, maybe millions of stories written, how it's the end of employment, how people are going to be out of jobs. You can go back to the cotton gin if you want. Go back to the horse and buggy. What was going to happen to all those people that took care of horses and put shoes on them and fed them and cleaned stalls? Well, we forgot that the internal combustion engine actually needs more maintenance than the horse. So we do go through a cycle where you could see people forced out of the workforce because their job has been made obsolete, but there's new opportunities that get created by the new thing. And so right now, if you look at the new thing, like we have a massive shortage of electricians in this country. To build data centers, and electricians get paid a really handsome salary. So if you're looking at people that work with their hands and build things, the AI machine's not doing that. I don't know how it is in Washington, D.C. here, but if you want to go get a plumber, electrician, or carpenter in your house, it's probably going to take you 2 weeks and it's going to be expensive.
But politically, there's an impact to that too, right? In that transition. So what does that look like? Do you expect that to, drive even more economic pessimism in the near term as folks are maybe making a transition from a role that, allows for some level of AI displacement to that HVAC repair?
There's always noise in the transition. So I'm going to sit here and I'll say, yes, there will be noise in the transition. Some people will lose their job because of AI. Some people will gain a job because of AI. But there will be other opportunities created by AI in building data centers, managing data centers, building power plants, managing power plants. There are all these new things that get created as potentially a job gets destroyed over here. So through the cycle, it will work out. Will there be some noise in the middle? There's always been noise as we go through these transformations.
Are you, from what you're seeing from Washington, are policymakers doing an adequate job of preparing people for that transition or developing policies that will facilitate that transition?
I don't. It's not clear to me that they're doing an inadequate or an adequate job. I think they're talking about it. I think the policy people in Washington are not clear enough on what AI is going to do and not going to do. So if you're in that position and the risk is people lose their jobs, you might as well get out on that side of the equation and say, look, I'm concerned about your job. I won't let AI take your job, because if it doesn't happen, they're fine. So from a political standpoint, it's probably a safer place to stand.
I see. One more for you, since we're running low on time here.
We haven't even got to the good questions.
Oh. My heart. Well, during prep for this interview, your team flagged data sovereignty as an issue that you are
huge issue.
Paying a huge attention to right now. That's not something that's necessarily in my wheelhouse, but as we were just discussing, data is now something that is powering the global economy. And, AI is going to turbocharge that. And recently, we've seen some areas where data is vulnerable, even in Iran, or with regard to Iran. Some AWS data centers in Bahrain and UAE were hit a few weeks ago. So what's the biggest risk that you think regulators are overlooking right now with regard to data?
Well, I don't know if it's a regulatory problem. It may be a regulatory problem. It's a business problem. So if you're in a country where data has to be stored within that country, so there's data sovereignty rules, and you're in a single cloud, you have learned in the last month or so that is a very high risk place to be. So this idea of a hybrid cloud, which we at IBM espouse, which is having your data in a place where it can go to multiple clouds and the clouds are interchangeable, has become dramatically more important in the last month. Because if you were in that cloud that got taken out, you were out of business. If you were in a hybrid cloud environment, you would have just had your data in a different cloud, in a Google cloud or something else, and you would have been seamless in your operation. So I think people now, a new risk that they're having to evaluate is, how do I manage my data most effectively? And it's probably some combination of on-premise, literally on-premise for your most important data, and hybrid cloud for your cloud data, making sure that any one data center or two data centers in a sovereign district can't affect your outcome. And so I think as people start evaluating their business risks and it's sort of like cybersecurity. It's a new business risk, is understanding where your data is, how you can move your data around, and how efficient you can be in moving your data around, so you can seamlessly integrate your business.
And our policymakers, have you seen anything that will make that process easier?
Well,
that transportability component.
Well, look, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have data sovereignty rules. We're never going to get to an ideal world. There's many countries, many large countries as well, that have very stringent rules about data domain within the four walls of the country. And if you're going to build a data center there, you're going to agree to that. Even if you're a U.S. data service provider, you're going to agree to four walls your data in that country. So the U.S. happens to not be one, but I do think as we get more and more data into the system, these sovereignty rules are going to get more intricate about what can be exported. Just like we have CFIUS rules and we have rules about what can be bought, what can be sold in the U.S., I think we're going to end up with more rules about what data needs to be protected where, how it's available, and who has access to it, which is going to only make this whole data equation more and more complex, which means I'm going to need to hire more data scientists. So, there's another job.
Another opportunity.
Another opportunity, exactly.
Well, we are out of time. Gary, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Welcome Politico's Vice President of AI and Innovation, Francesca Barber, and the CVS Health Senior Vice President of Government and Public Affairs, Melissa A. Schulman.
Got the A in.
Exactly. Good morning, everyone, again. My name is Francesca Barber, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Product, AI, and Audience, and I'm joined today with Melissa Schulman. She is the Senior Vice President of Government and Public Affairs at CVS Health. Thank you for joining us today. She's here to discuss the role of healthcare companies not just in delivering care, but also in supporting economic resilience and opportunity across the country. So, healthcare is often discussed separately from the broader economy, but it actually plays a larger role in how our economy functions and how it grows. So let's dive into the first question. Big picture, at its core, CVS is a healthcare company. What brings you to the Economic Summit today?
So at our core, we are a healthcare company, and our mission is to simplify care, improve health, make it more affordable, one person, one family, and one community at a time. And last year, we did a nationwide economic impact report, and we wanted to see what was the impact of CVS Health and our company in communities across the nation. And we were, quite frankly, stunned to discover that we have a $474 billion annual impact on the American economy. And in addition to our own 300,000 employees, we actually support about 1.3 million jobs nationwide. That's not a number that we were expecting, but when we sat back and started looking at the data, it started to make a lot more sense.
So you just mentioned $474 billion impact to the U.S. economy. It's huge. So how does that translate to outcomes in communities across the country?
So I think we show up in communities in different ways. If you go back to the CVS Health origin story, we started 60 years ago in Lowell, Massachusetts, and it was supposed to be the consumer value store. But as businessmen just starting out, they didn't want to pay for all those letters, and that's actually where the CVS comes from. But if you take that beginning in Lowell, Massachusetts, and then you fast forward to the early days of COVID, when also in Massachusetts we stood up the first retail testing site for COVID, and then you fast forward to today where we've just announced a new app, Health 100, that's going to help consumers manage their own health care. It's sort of the arc of the company, I think, speaks to how we interact with individuals every day and what we're doing in communities every day. 85% of Americans today live within 10 miles of a CVS pharmacy, but we also, as we are part of those communities and supporting other jobs and economic impact in those communities, that also means that we're generating tax revenue, state, local, federal government, to the tune of $58.6 billion. And so that means we're supporting our own colleagues, their neighbors, their families, the schools, the fire departments, et cetera, really into the fabric of the local communities. And so while in some as you're the store on the corner, other times they think of us, you're this big corporation, but the way really we look at it is that we're we're an integral part of those communities, just the same as anybody else in those communities are. And our impact on those communities is something that's very important to us.
So just to go a bit deeper on that and the impact on the local communities, healthcare companies like CVS contribute to the workforce in more ways than people might immediately realize. You mentioned some of them just then. What does that multi-industry footprint actually look like, and how does it help deliver quality care while contributing to those resilient communities?
I think one way that we try to add to the resiliencies of community is supporting housing in communities. And so we have raised almost, or contributed almost $2 billion into affordable housing in communities across the country. I think keeping the health care local and affordable and accessible is, again, a key element in helping the economic resiliency of those communities, particularly when you talk about affordability in healthcare. That's important for consumers, that's important for employers, that's important for the states and local governments who are running health plans. And so as we try to support that affordability and that access, it's also adding into the resiliency of the communities. But it's also important to us that we're also showing up in not so great times. So when there are hurricanes or when there are fires, we're often one of the first people back in the community. We were one of the first stores open after the Palisades fire because the folks who are bringing that community back, they needed the pharmacy nearby. But it's also something like delivering medications by drone in flooded areas. And so it's really integrating ourselves into the community and what is needed in both good times and bad. And so in addition to the economic impact, which is substantial, it is also the grounding in what's needed community by community.
In policy making, just pivoting slightly outside of the local communities. So policy making, US healthcare and the national economy are often treated as separate debates. A lot of the things that you've just mentioned actually tell a different story. And, you know, they are fundamentally interconnected. So why is that approach problematic? How does expanding access to care directly strengthen local economies?
Again, I think that access to care in local economies, it is about having a healthy workforce. It's also about having access to health care that is convenient to when consumers need it. And so whether that is being able to talk to a physician through the app or a nurse practitioner to figure out what's going on at 3 a.m. when the kid with the fever, or whether it is being able to cram in that sports physical that every parent freaks out about as sports season starting for their kids, but the Minute Clinic's open on evenings and weekends. But it's also having that specialty pharmacist on the other end of the line to help you manage complicated medications. And so making it easier and more accessible for consumers in their everyday lives allows them to go out and do their jobs, go to school, do the things that they need to do to help strengthen their communities, but more importantly, be able to carry forward in their lives in the way that's most effective, productive, and brings them the most joy. And if we can make any of that a little bit easier through whatever part of our company it is, again, whether it's across the counter, through the app, on the phone, then that's where we are in helping to strengthen the community. We also do a lot of job training, and we invest in workforce training centers. across the country to help people find their next job. And so it's an investment that goes beyond the healthcare, but also into things like job training. And so whether we're hiring pharmacists, nurse practitioners, data scientists, as the last panel just mentioned, sometimes, we're like, are we a healthcare company? Are we a healthcare IT company? And quite frankly, these days, you're both. And so again, it's as the economy is growing and developing, our company is also growing and developing to help be a part of that growth in the United States.
As we wrap up, what responsibility do healthcare companies like CVS have in strengthening economic resilience in the communities they serve? And what role specifically should policymakers play in supporting that work?
I think that it's important that we not think about everything in silos. And again, our responsibility is to try to keep that care within reach. But I think it also is about the private sector and government working together to improve the system. I may still be Pollyanna and naive. I came to this town longer than I am willing to admit. And always have fundamentally believed that partnerships between government and the private sector ultimately result in better policymaking and better approaches to things like healthcare and helping individuals, and recognizing our role in the economy and our role in the local economy and what we're doing to build it, I think is something that, in partner with government understanding that, it's one of the reasons we did the economic impact report, is to fully understand what our impact is at that local level and what it means to the economic strength and vitality of communities across the country.
Well, thank you so much for your time today and for CVS Health support today with the Policy Summit, Economic Summit. Thank you for all of your time, and we appreciate you being part of the conversation.
Thanks for having us today, and it's been a great program so far, so good luck with the rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, still ahead, we have a conversation with Congressman Mike Flood. But up next, we have a conversation that is part of a series Politico is doing at all of our policy summits this year, timed to the 250th anniversary of the United States. All of the policy issues we're discussing today do not exist in a vacuum. They are part of a history. And today we're talking about AI and its impact on the workforce. Technology has long disrupted the way we work, ways good, bad, and otherwise. And our next panel will dig into how AI is likely to change the labor market yet again. So I'm pleased to welcome to the stage to lead that conversation, Politico White House reporter Sophia Kai.
We're very excited for this panel. We're going to be talking about the impact of AI on labor. It seems to be the thing that everyone wants to talk about right now. We have with us a great panel, Lauren McFerrin. She is the executive director of the AFL-CIO Tech Institute. We have Joseph Briggs, senior global economist at Goldman Sachs. And we have with us Peter McCrory, head of economic research at Thrombuck. Thank you all for joining us. Lauren, you're closest to the front lines of this, and AI is often compared to past technological transformations. What feels different or the same about AI this time around?
I think what
we're seeing is a lot of sense that AI is this moving freight train that can't possibly be guided in any way. And history teaches us that that's not the case. When we've implemented new technologies, we have been able to guide the ship such that we can make sure that there's a minimal impact on the workforce, that workers are kept safe, that workers have opportunities to build new paths when they need to. So I really think that there's a narrative here that's not really supported by history, that somehow AI is inevitable and we all just have to kind of deal with the fallout.
Joseph, you've produced some fascinating research on the impact of AI on work, including one, eye-popping statistic that AI will automate around 25% of all work tasks. When will that happen? I mean, how far away are we from that?
Yeah, there's two things to bear in mind. That 25% number, it does reflect the gross amount of work that we think will ultimately be automated. Just to be clear right up front, that doesn't mean that 25% of workers are going to lose their jobs. That's not our view at all. A lot of what we think will happen is that these work tasks will be automated. It will free up capacity to do other things. And as a result, economy-wide productivity is going to rise. Now, there's a big debate right now around whether or not we're going to see this automation occur over the next 1, 2, 3 years. We've been much more cautious in penciling in an adoption cycle. Our base case is that we see the adoption occur over a roughly 10-year period. This would be a little bit faster than what we've seen in historical technological cycles. But still, it's not as if adoption and automation is going to happen overnight. I think that there's a lot of pieces that need to be put in place, change management considerations, before we see the full impact on the workforce.
Okay, Peter, you've been measuring AI displacement risk, and you found limited evidence to date that AI has affected employment. Tell us about, your new measure and how you came to that conclusion that you presented.
Yeah, so in some sense, it's a similar point that the potential exposure to large language models is quite substantial. So you can think about any type of task that you do with a computer, in principle, is the sort of thing that large language models and rapidly improving AI will soon be able to do. But in practice, for example, that number is like 90% of potential exposure for computer and coding-related occupations. The actual usage that we see on our platform for work-related tasks in automated ways for those jobs is around 30%. So at present, there's a big gap between potential exposure and observed exposure. When we take that observed exposure measure to the data and we compare workers who have high exposure and low exposure, we see no systematic increase in unemployment rates for those most exposed. So at present, no impact yet. Although one thing I will note is that our measure is correlated with the BLS's own projections of which occupations might decline over the next decade. And so it might be picking up this longer term job transformation and restructuring that may very well occur in the economy.
So what Peter is saying is the people who could potentially be using AI and the people who are using it now, there's a big gap. Take us inside of that a little. You're employed by Anthropic. Can you tell us some of the headwinds around AI adoption and whether the concerns held by skeptics can ultimately be addressed by the producers of AI tools, whether it's Anthropic or OpenAI?
I do think that adoption has been much faster than past waves of technologies. And one way that we see this is about a year ago when we started tracking how people and businesses are using Claude. Roughly a third of all jobs had a quarter of their tasks appearing in our data set. That number has, over the past year, risen to 50%. So there's a rapid spread of adoption across a wider range of activities on our platform. When we look at enterprise adoption, though, one thing that we do see is that there are barriers to adoption, mainly data modernization and organizational restructuring